On Christmas Eve, a fierce blizzard battered a crumbling South Memphis diner. Inside, 70-year-old Martha Lewis, a frail black widow, sat alone, trembling hands counting pennies, her only earnings that week. Suddenly, motorcycles roared by in the middle of a snowstorm, and 10 Hell's Angels bikers, freezing and desperate, begged for shelter. Fear gripped her heart, but with her last ounce of courage, Martha opened the door, shared her last bowl of soup, and saved a life. Little did she know that act of kindness would soon bring hundreds back. Before tonight's story unfolds, don't forget to subscribe and let me know, where are you watching? It was Christmas Eve in South Memphis, the kind of night when every house on Maple Street glowed warm and golden. Through the windows came the hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the rustle of wrapping paper. Families gathered around roasted turkeys. Children chased each other past Christmas trees, dressed in colored lights. The whole block looked alive, every window, a frame of comfort and joy, except one. At the far end of the street, where the pavement cracked and the lamppost leaned, one small house sat in darkness. Its lights had been cut off weeks ago. Inside, 70-year-old Martha Lewis sat alone at her kitchen table, her breath a faint fog in the air. The only light came from a dying candle burning low inside a chipped cup. She watched the glow flicker against the peeling walls, hearing faint echoes of carols drifting from other homes. A smile tried to find her face, but didn't quite make it. "Whole world's feasting," she whispered, "and here I am, counting change." On the table before her lay a handful of coins, what she'd earned that week selling sweet bread at the Saturday market. Next to the coins, a half-empty jar of honey and a framed photograph rested a younger Martha and her husband Louis, standing in front of their bright new diner sign, Louis's Table, where neighbors eat like family. The photo's edges were worn, but the smiles were still alive. "You always said honey made life taste softer," she murmured to the picture. "Guess we ran out." Outside, the laughter on the street began to fade as families drifted off to sleep. The world quieted. That was when the first wind came, long, low, and cold. It brushed against the window, testing the cracks, whispering through them like a warning. Martha looked up. The candle's flame trembled. In the distance, wind moaning through the distance rolled faintly, though there hadn't been a forecast for storms. "Well," she sighed, pulling her shawl tighter, "guess even heaven's running low on mercy tonight." The heater had died days ago when she couldn't pay the bill. The air had the kind of chill that seeped into bones and memories. She stood slowly, her knees stiff, and reached for the small lantern by the sink. 2 houses down, she could still picture the diner, dark, boarded up, silent. It used to be the heart of this street, filled with neighbors who never let anyone eat alone. That was before her Louis fell gravely ill with a cruel disease that stole him away too soon, and with him a piece of her soul. His death wasn't just a moment. It was the start of a profound, aching solitude. For 5 years, the house echoed with his absence. She ate alone, slept alone, woke alone each day, a stark reminder of a life cleaved in two. She existed wrapped in a loneliness so thick it felt like drowning. The wind picked up outside, sharper now, carrying bits of snow that slapped against the window. Martha struck a match. The tiny flame bloomed, trembling in the draft, and she shielded it with her hand. "You and me again, candlelight," she whispered. By the time she set the lantern in its place, the laughter outside had vanished. The neighborhood slept, and the first flakes of the storm began to fall soft, slow, and certain. Unable to sleep, Martha pulled on her coat and trudged through the snow to the diner, seeking the ghosts of better days. 30 years ago, the diner had once been more than brick and paint. It had a pulse. Louis's Table didn't just serve food, it served mercy. Every morning, the smell of honey and fried chicken drifted down Maple Street, wrapping around the tired and the hungry like a promise. "Morning, Mama Louis," the bus drivers would shout through the door, shaking the cold off their coats. "Sit down before the coffee cools," Martha would call back, waving the steam away from her face. And Louis, God Louis, he'd be behind the counter, apron crooked, stirring his soup with the same rhythm he used to hum the blues. He had this line he said to every stranger who came in, broke or lost. "You can pay when your heart's full again." Most never did, but they always came back. Sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a pie, sometimes with nothing but gratitude. Martha walked now through that same room, boots crunching over sugar packets left from another lifetime. The chalkboard behind the counter was a blur of white smudges, but if you looked close, you could still read the ghost of handwriting, Earl and Jenny 2002. Mr. Harris. 1 year sober, for Mama Lewis. Thank you. She ran her palm across the wall, whispering, "You remember them too, don't you?" Her voice cracked in the air, soft but steady, and for a second she swore she heard laughter echo back. Back then, the place had been the street's heartbeat. People came to eat, yes, but mostly they came to be seen. When the factories shut down, Lewis cooked through the night. When the church burned, he fed the choir for free. When a man got out of prison, this was the first place he stopped. Now the only sounds were her own breath and the storm pressing its cold hand against the glass. Martha crossed to the counter, opened the old cash drawer. Inside a tin box and folded receipts yellowed like autumn leaves. She lifted the tin. Inside recipe cards written in Lewis's hand, neat, careful, steady. She smiled faintly. "Always extra honey," she said under her breath. "You never did believe in too sweet." For a long moment she sat at their booth by the window, the one facing the sign he painted himself. The snow outside thickened, muting the street, softening every edge. She could see her reflection in the glass, one woman, 2 flames the candle on the sill, and the light in her eyes, both fighting not to go out. She whispered mostly to herself. They said this place fed the neighborhood, but it fed me too. Martha sank back into the booth, too weary to face the empty house waiting across the street. The candle burned on in the window, a small light against a city that had forgotten how to look for them. Outside, the storm roared, sealing her in with the ghosts of the diner's better days. As she sat in the booth, a faint rumble, different from the storm's howl, echoed in the distance, then faded. She dismissed it, blaming the wind. The storm had grown fiercer, slamming against the diner's windows in thick, blinding sheets of snow. Martha sat in the booth, the candle's flame trembling on the sill. Wind howled through Maple Street like a train off its tracks, carrying bits of ice that rattled the glass. She pulled her shawl tighter, glancing at the diner's locked door. Across the street, her house stood dark as lifeless as the night. Still burning, she murmured to the candle, "So I guess I will too." Inside the diner, the air felt colder, the storm pressing against the old walls until they creaked. Martha pulled her shawl tighter, the candle's glow flickering across the empty booths. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clock's slow tick and the storm's relentless howl. Charlie, her cat, poked his head from under the couch and hissed when the wind found a crack in the window. "Don't look at me like that," she said softly. "You're not the one freezing to death." She struck a match and lit a few candles, the kind she saved for power outages. Warm light spread through the room, trembling on the framed photo of her and Lewis. She paused, touching the glass with her fingertips. "You'd probably laugh at this, huh?" she whispered. "Me sitting here talking to ghosts." Outside, the storm grew angrier. It screamed against the windows, demanding to be let in. The air turned colder, the kind that bit straight through fabric and into bone. She wrapped her shawl tighter, listening to the clock tick a slow, deliberate rhythm that only made the silence worse. Then came a sound. Bang! The entire door rattled in its frame. Martha froze. Her breath caught halfway. "Just the wind," she said quickly, but her voice sounded too thin to believe it. She stood there waiting. The storm answered with another bang, louder, closer, heavier. Her heart started to pound. She grabbed the lantern, holding it close to her chest. The next sound wasn't the wind. It was rhythm. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Bang, bang, bang. The house seemed to stop breathing. Martha's voice trembled. "Who's there?" No reply, only the scream of wind tearing across the porch. She stepped closer, just enough for the lantern's glow to reach the frosted glass. For a second, she thought she saw something, a dark blur moving beyond the snow. Then it was gone. The handle trembled once, just once. Her grip tightened on the lantern. "Lord, don't you dare let that be real," she whispered. Then a voice cut through the noise, faint. Desperate, a man's voice, nearly swallowed by the storm. "Please, somebody, open up." Her eyes widened. Another shout followed, rougher, breaking between breaths. "There's someone hurt. We need help." Martha's whole body went cold. Her mind screamed, "Don't move," but her heart already had. She took a small step toward the door, then stopped. She looked toward the photo of Lewis, glowing in candlelight. "What would you do, huh?" she asked, her voice shaking. She remembered Lewis one stormy night, opening the diner to a drenched stranger. "If we don't help, who will?" he'd said. Those words echoed now, louder than her fear. The wind slammed again, shaking the walls. She could hear movement boots crunching in the snow, low voices shouting to one another through the storm. She pressed her hand to the glass. It burned with cold. "What if it's not what it sounds like?" she whispered. "What if it's—" She couldn't finish. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She imagined men in the dark faces. She couldn't see shapes moving closer. She turned away, clutching the lantern to her chest like a shield. No, stay calm. You don't know who's out there. You don't owe anybody anything tonight. But then another voice rose, a younger one, weak, trembling. Ma'am, please, we can't stay out here. Her throat closed. Every instinct told her to keep the lock turned, to wait, to hide. Instead, she found herself standing right in front of the door. Her hand hovered over the key. God help me, she whispered. Her fingers shook as she turned it. The sound of the metal latch echoed through the dinner like thunder. The storm roared back in answer. The key turned with a harsh metallic snap, and before she could second-guess herself, the door cracked open just an inch. The wind exploded through the gap, howling like something alive, slapping the air out of her chest. Snow burst in, hitting her face, and eyes stinging like needles. She staggered backward, clutching the lantern, nearly losing her grip. Lord have mercy, she gasped, shielding her face as the cold swallowed the room. Then she saw them. At first it looked like shadows, huge moving shapes tangled in the storm, but as her eyes adjusted to the chaos of white and gray, she realized they were men. 10 of them. Big men in heavy leather jackets, their patches gleaming wet under the lantern light, a red-winged skull, white letters arched above it. Hell's Angels. The words froze her blood. They stood in a loose huddle, snow plastered to their faces and hair, breath fogging in thick clouds. Their motorcycles, massive machines, were parked haphazardly along the curb, half buried in snow. One of the men stumbled forward, his face pale beneath a layer of frost. He held another by the shoulders, a younger one slumped, barely conscious. Ma'am, please, the older man shouted, his voice cracked and raw. He's not gonna make it. We just need to get him warm. Martha's body locked in place. Every instinct screamed, don't move, don't let them in. Her hands trembled so violently that the lantern's flame shook, throwing wild shadows across the walls. These men were everything she'd been taught to fear. Tattoos, chains, hard eyes that looked like they'd seen too many fights. One of them lifted his hand against the wind, shouting something she couldn't hear. For a heartbeat, she thought he was reaching for her. Her breath came out fast and shallow. Her mind raced through every warning she'd ever heard about robbers, drifters, outlaws. Hell's Angels, she thought. In my diner, dear God, what am I doing? Another gust hit, nearly tearing the door from her grip. The man nearest her shouted again, his voice breaking through the roar. We're freezing out here, please. He gestured toward the younger biker whose head hung limp over his arm. She looked at the boy, no older than 20. His lips were blue, his skin the color of paper. He wasn't moving. Martha's throat tightened. She glanced back into the diner, at the empty tables, at the faint candlelight still flickering against the window. You can't fix the world, Lewis had said once, but you can feed it one plate at a time. She blinked hard, the snow burning her eyes, and for a long second she did nothing. Her fingers clutched the edge of the door so tight her knuckles turned white. The wind screamed, begging her to decide. Then she stepped aside. Get him in, she shouted over the storm voice, breaking with both fear and command. The men didn't wait. They surged forward in a rush of cold air, and heavy boots carrying the injured biker between them. The force of their movement pushed her backward. Her lantern flickered dangerously, its light catching the edges of their leather and the metal chains hanging from their jackets. The smell of gasoline sweat and snow filled the diner. Over there, she pointing toward the nearest booth. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. The big man nodded, lowering the unconscious boy gently onto the seat. For a moment, everything was noise boots stomping, men coughing, the storm howling through the still open door. Martha forced her shaking hand to grab the handle and slam the door shut. The latch clicked, muting the wind. The sudden silence rang louder than the storm itself. She turned around slowly. 10 strangers filled her diner, steam rising from their jackets, their breath fogging the air. The lantern's glow caught their faces, hardened, scarred, and exhausted. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She could smell leather-cold metal and desperation. Every part of her body wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. One of the men, the leader she guessed tall, with a gray beard and eyes that looked carved from ice, stepped forward. He took off his gloves, breath shaking, and nodded at her. Thank you, ma'am, he said, his voice low and sincere. You just saved a life. Martha didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat refused to work. She just stood there shaking, watching as the storm outside howled against the walls like it wanted to take them all back. The lantern's flame steadied, catching the edge of the boy's pale face, and for the first time that night, Martha realized what she'd done. She'd opened her door, and there was no going back. The diner had never felt smaller. Steam curled from the men's jackets pooling near the ceiling, while the floor glittered with melting snow. Every sound, the clink of a zipper, the creak of leather, seemed too loud against the hush. Martha stood near the counter lantern, trembling in her hand, the flame throwing jagged light over the strangers who had filled her silence. Roy, the gray-bearded man, crouched beside the young biker sprawled in the booth. "Easy, Eli," he murmured, brushing snow from the boy's hair. Eli's face was ghost-pale lashes crusted with frost. His jeans were soaked through, torn at the thigh where blood had darkened the fabric almost black. Each breath rattled like glass. Martha's throat tightened. She'd seen that kind of breathing before, the shallow, uneven kind that meant the body was losing its fight. She took one small step forward before she realized it. Roy looked up, meeting her eyes. His tone was low, careful. "We didn't mean to barge in, ma'am." He took a spill on the highway, went down hard when the truck skidded. Martha's voice cracked. "A spill?" The red-haired man near the counter answered, rubbing his raw hands. "We were hauling charity boxes, Coats Toys, you name it, for the veterans' shelter downtown." His words puffed white in the air. Truck lost control, slid right into a ditch. "We tried to pull him out, but—" He glanced toward Eli. He caught the worst of it. The explanation came in pieces, honest, but jagged like the storm itself. Martha listened, her breath quick and shallow. Everything about them, the tattoos, the chains, the skull patches, told her to stay afraid. But the tremor in Roy's voice, the way he kept glancing back at the boy, told her something else entirely. Eli groaned, his hand twitching weakly. Martha startled, her heart lurching. "He's freezing," she said before she could stop herself. "Get those wet clothes off him, or he'll lose more than blood." Roy moved fast, nodding. "Ben, help me lift him." "Mikey, grab that towel." They followed her words like soldiers taking orders. Martha hesitated for half a heartbeat, then crossed the room. Her knees cracked as she knelt by the booth, placing the lantern near Eli's leg. "Hold the light steady," she ordered. "And someone close that door. Vent before it kills us all." Mikey hurried to block the draft. Roy tore at Eli's ripped jeans, muttering a curse when he saw the gash, a long, ugly slice across the thigh, packed with ice and gravel. "Damn, it's deep," he said, voice shaking now. Martha pressed her lips together, forcing calm into her tone. "Don't talk. Move." She reached for a clean towel from under the counter, ripped it into strips with surprising strength, and pressed them hard against the wound. Eli gasped, jerking, but she didn't flinch. "You'll live," she said quietly. Roy's eyes softened. "You sure sound like you know what you're doing, ma'am." "I used to run this place," she answered, not looking up. "Used to feed every sorry soul that came limping through that door. Guess I haven't forgotten how to patch one up either." The men exchanged glances, half respect, half relief. The storm battered the walls again, rattling the windows until the glass shook. One of the bikers whispered, "Feels like the damn world's ending out there." "It won't," Martha said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Not tonight." For a few seconds, no one moved. Only Eli's shallow breathing filled the air. Then Roy stood, running a hand through his soaked beard. "Didn't think we'd find a light still burning on this street," he said. "Guess we got lucky." Martha finally looked up at him. The fear was still there, sharp alive, but behind it something else was forming. A flicker of recognition, of trust she didn't yet want to name. "You didn't find luck," she said softly. "You found Lewis's table." Roy nodded slowly like he'd heard the name before. "Then I'd say we found the right place." Martha adjusted the towel on Eli's leg and glanced toward the window where the snow pressed hard against the glass. The storm screamed, but the diner held. Still deep down, she knew the night wasn't finished testing her. The kettle clicked once, then hissed to life. Martha adjusted the flame, her fingers steady despite the tremor that hadn't yet left her bones. The smell of gas mixed with cold air and damp leather, sharp but grounding. Behind her, the men moved quietly, their boots scraping against the tile, their voices low. She didn't turn. "Keep his legs still," she said, her tone carrying authority she hadn't used in years. "Yes, ma'am," Roy answered. The word ma'am still sounded strange in a place that had known only silence. Martha poured water into a dented pot, then reached under the counter for an old tin box. The lid stuck for a second before snapping open. Inside lay the recipe cards, edges curled, ink faded, but Lewis's careful handwriting still strong. Her fingers found the top card, honey chicken stew. The smell of paper cinnamon and dust pulled at something deep in her chest. "Sweeten the world, one spoon at a time, Martha," she heard him say, his voice soft and teasing. "Something wrong, ma'am?" Roy asked gently. She blinked, closing the box. "Just deciding if I still remember how to cook." Roy hesitated. "You tell us what to do. We'll follow orders." She turned, eyeing the gray-bearded man. Despite the size of him, there was nothing cruel in his eyes, just fatigue and the quiet respect of someone used to being mistrusted. She handed him a knife and gestured toward a small basket on the shelf. "There's an onion left from this morning. I brought it over when I lit the candle." He nodded, setting to work. "That's a good start." The rhythm began to return, knife against wood, the whistle of the kettle, the faint hum of conversation. Mikey stacked candles near the booth for light. Ben wiped condensation off the window with his sleeve. Eli stirred his eyes, fluttering open. Color was starting to come back to his face, faint but real. "Smells good," he said, voice weak but polite. "That's the point," Martha replied, adjusting the pot. "Food that smells right can fix more than hunger." He tried to smile. "You must have done this a long time." "All my life," she said. Roy stirred the pot, the spoon clinking gently. "This was your place, huh?" "It was ours," she said, keeping her eyes on the flame. "Mine and my husband's. We built it together. Lost him first, then lost the rest." No one spoke for a while. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was full, like everyone in the room understood what it meant to lose something and keep going anyway. The scent of onions and honey began to fill the diner, warm and rich. Martha dipped a spoon, tasted, then nodded. "Needs more honey." Ben chuckled softly. "You don't hear that too often." "You're not most folks," she said, pouring a thin stream of golden syrup into the pot. The air shifted, less of a kitchen, more of a memory being reheated. When the stew was ready, she ladled it into chipped bowls and passed them out. The men ate slow, careful, as if afraid the moment might disappear if they rushed. Roy took a bite, eyes closing. "That's something special," he murmured. "It's Lewis's recipe," she said. "I just keep it warm." Eli looked up from his bowl, the steam softening the bruises on his face. "Thank you, ma'am, for the food and for letting us in." Martha's voice softened, almost a whisper. "You're welcome. Just don't make me regret it." The line earned a quiet laugh from around the room. The sound settled like heat under the walls. When she finally sat down, she didn't eat. She just watched them faces once, harsh now, lit by candlelight spoons, clinking in rhythm, the smell of stew and snow mixing in the air. For the first time in years, the diner didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Then, somewhere near the booth, Eli coughed once hard, then again. His spoon slipped from his hand and clattered against the bowl. Roy's head snapped up. "Eli." The laughter died. The air changed. Martha rose from her chair, her heartbeat loud in her ears. "Don't move him yet," she said quietly, already reaching for a towel. "Let me see what's going on." The men froze their bowls, forgotten eyes turning toward the boy. Eli's bowl slipped from his hand before anyone realized what was happening. The sound, a hollow clink, cut through the quiet like a crack in glass. Roy's voice came low at first, but then the boy's head slumped forward and panic filled the room. "Something's wrong with him." Chairs scraped, boots hit the tile. The air changed from warmth to fear in a single breath. Martha was already moving her body, reacting before her mind caught up. "Move," she said, her tone calm but commanding, pushing past Roy. Her fingers pressed against Eli's neck, then his forehead. His skin burned. "He's burning up," she whispered, then louder. "It's bad." The boy's chest rose and fell too fast, his breaths shallow and wet. "Ben, bring me the pot. Hot water," she ordered. "Roy, tear that towel in half. Tucker blankets, hurry." They scattered instantly, the scrape of boots echoing against the walls. Outside, the storm howled again, shaking the glass. Martha wrung the towel in hot water and pressed it over Eli's chest. "Easy now, sweetheart," she murmured. "Breathe slow." Roy crouched beside her, eyes scanning the wound on Eli's leg. "It's infected. Looks bad." Martha nodded. "That's what's got him burning up." Mikey hovered near the counter pail. "Can we get him to a hospital?" "Not in this weather," Martha said sharply. "We stay here and keep him alive." She brushed the boy's hair from his damp forehead, her voice softening again. "You hear me, honey. You're not leaving me tonight." The room quieted. Only Eli's ragged breathing filled the space. Steam fogged the windows, making the outside world disappear entirely. Roy rubbed his palms together, helpless. "He's just a kid. Then he's got to fight like a man," Martha said. Ben brought another pot of hot water. The smell of metal sweat and candle wax mixed in the air. Everyone's faces shone in the flickering light. Eli trembled, teeth chattering, his lips pale. "Come on," son, Roy whispered. "Stay with us." Martha dabbed his face again. "You're doing fine. Just breathe for me." Mikey paced behind her, his voice unsteady. "He's getting colder." "No," Martha said, though her tone faltered. "He's still fighting, and so are we." Then an icy gust slammed against the diner. One candle went out, then another. The light flickered wildly. Roy looked up, jaw tight. "We're losing light." Martha turned toward the old lantern near the stove. The small flame inside was trembling, almost gone. "That one can't die," she whispered, stepping closer. Roy frowned. "You got more oil." She shook her head. "Not a drop left." The room went still. Every eye turned to the fading lantern, their last bit of warmth, their last piece of hope. The flame wavered, shrinking until it was barely a spark. Martha bent near it, her hand shielding the glass as if protecting a heartbeat. "Don't go out," she whispered. "Not yet." Eli gasped for air, his chest rattling. "He's getting colder," Roy said softly. "He won't last long." Silence fell again, until Mikey's voice broke through it, steady but trembling. "If we can't save both, we save the light." Everyone turned toward him. His eyes were fixed on the lantern, then on the bikes outside, half buried in snow. "Mikey." Roy started reading his thoughts, but Mikey was already pulling on his jacket. "Mikey, wait." Roy grabbed his arm. "You step out there, that wind'll tear you apart." The young man met his eyes. "We can't let that flame die, Roy. Not after what she's done for us." He turned to Martha. "Keep him breathing, ma'am. I'll bring back something to feed that light." "Mikey, please," Martha said, voice cracking. "You don't have to." But he was already at the door. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly, and pushed into the storm. The door slammed behind him. Snow burst inward like smoke. Martha braced against it, pushing hard until it shut. Her hands trembled on the latch. "Lord, keep him safe," she whispered. The diner fell into silence again. The lantern flickered, weak and small. Every second stretched thin as glass. Roy's voice was barely a whisper. "He won't make it far in that." "No," Martha said. "But sometimes people do what they must, not what they can." Time crawled. The storm screamed outside, battering the windows. Eli shivered, breath shallow, the towel slipping from his chest. Martha pressed it back, her hand trembling. "You hold on, sweetheart," she whispered. "That light's coming back." Then somewhere outside, the faint crunch of boots. A dull thud. A voice swearing softly, half choked by the wind. Roy was halfway to the door when it burst open. Mikey stumbled in his face, ghost white with frost, clutching a small metal can to his chest. "Gasoline," he panted, "from my bike. It's all I could get." Roy caught him before he fell. "You're freezing." Mikey tried to smile through the tremor in his jaw. "Worth it," he said. "Couldn't let her light die." Martha took the can from his shaking hands. "No one's dying tonight," she said. "Not you, not him, not the light." She unscrewed the cap and poured just a few drops into the lantern. The smell of gasoline filled the air, sharp, metallic, alive. For one long, breathless second, nothing happened. Then whoosh! The flame caught bright and strong, spilling golden light across the diner. Shadows melted from the corners, warmth rushed back into the room. Roy exhaled, shoulders sagging. Tucker let out a shaky laugh. "Would you look at that?" he said. It came back. Martha smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her tired eyes. "So did we." Eli stirred a weak groan escaping his lips. Martha brushed his hair aside. "That's it, honey. You keep fighting." Color returned slowly to his cheeks. His breathing deepened. Mikey slumped near the stove, shaking. Roy handed him a towel. "You nearly froze out there." Mikey managed a faint smile. "I've been colder," he said softly, "but I never saw light like that before." Roy turned toward Martha, his voice low with awe. "Guess that's what happens when someone shows you what strength really looks like." Martha didn't reply. She just watched the lantern's flame dancing in the glass, bright, steady, alive. Outside, the storm began to fade, its growl sinking to a tired sigh. Inside, silence returned, gentler now, almost kind. Martha sank into a chair, her breath slow and uneven. Her eyes stayed on the flame, the reflection of it trembling in her pupils. "Louis," she whispered so softly it barely left her lips, "I did what you would have done." Then, after a pause, her gaze drifted to the window, past the glass, past the snow, to the shadow of the diner's old sign half buried outside. Her voice lowered, a note of ache threading through the calm. "And maybe that's why we lost it all back then, isn't it?" Roy looked up from where he sat, but Martha didn't explain. She just stared out at the night, the light still burning beside her, a light that had survived even when the people who built it hadn't. Hours later, as dawn neared, the fever finally broke. Eli's breathing eased, and the storm outside began to fade. Roy watched her sink into the chair, the lantern's glow washing over her lined face. Martha's shawl had slipped off one shoulder. Her hands trembled slightly, palms open toward the heat. For a moment no one moved. The only sound was the soft hiss of the lamp and the wind dying against the glass. Roy stepped closer, his boots creaking over the floor. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice came low, careful, as if he was afraid to break the fragile calm. Martha blinked like someone waking from a long dream. "Just tired," she said. "Been a long night." He nodded, easing himself into the chair across from her. "Looked like you were talking to somebody when you sat down." She gave a faint smile. "I was." Her gaze flicked toward the empty booth near the back. "My husband used to sit right there. When things got quiet, he'd hum that same blues song every night. I still catch myself listening for it." Roy glanced over his shoulder toward the spot she meant. The cushion was torn, the vinyl cracked with age. He rubbed his palms together, chasing the chill. "You keep the place like he's still here." "I guess I do." Martha's voice softened. "Maybe it's foolish, but it makes the silence easier." She looked down at her hands. After he passed, the diner didn't sound right without him. The coffee pot still bubbled, the bell still rang, but the heart was gone. Roy leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The scent of gasoline and honey still lingered faintly in the air. "You ran it by yourself after that, I tried." She let out a small laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Opened every morning, wiped the tables, set out plates that nobody used. It's strange how hard it is to stop cooking for ghosts." Roy's brow furrowed, his voice soft. "You said earlier the bank took it." "Yeah," she said quietly. "One day I walked in and there was a paper on the door. Big red letters. The man who gave it to me, he was polite. Said it was just business." She paused, her jaw tightening. That word never did sound right in a place built on kindness. Roy looked down, tracing the rim of his coffee mug with a finger. "Ain't much mercy in business." No, Martha agreed. But there was mercy in this room once. People came here when they didn't have anywhere else to go. Lewis used to say, "Feed the hungry, first count the money later." Roy smiled a little. "Sounds like a good man." "The best kind," she said. Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. The kind who never asked what someone had before handing them a plate. Roy sat back, exhaling through his nose. He stared at the flickering lamp between them. "You know, that's what we try to do too. People see the jackets and the noise. They don't see what's underneath. We just wanted to make something good out of the road." Martha looked up, studying him. The tattoos on his hands caught the light lines and scars, a story written in ink. "That's the thing about good men," she said softly. "Sometimes the world teaches them to hide it." Roy gave a small nod, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Guess it takes someone like you to remind us we don't have to." A brief silence followed, the kind that wasn't empty, but full. The fire crackled. Mikey shifted in his sleep near the stove, his boots steaming dry. Eli murmured something in his dreams, but didn't wake. Martha looked around the room, the coats hanging, the bowls still on the counter, the faint marks where chairs had been dragged closer to the fire. The diner felt different now, heavier somehow, like it was remembering how to breathe. "I used to think this place died when Lewis did," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "But maybe it was just waiting for someone to walk back through that door." Roy looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "Then maybe you were waiting too." She met his gaze, holding it a moment. "Maybe I was." The wind outside had quieted to a hum. The walls no longer rattled. Martha reached across the table, adjusted the lantern's wick, and the flame steadied gold calm alive. Roy's voice came softer now. "You know, the way that light came back earlier after Mikey brought the gas, I ain't ever seen anything like it. Felt like the whole world was watching it breathe." Martha smiled faintly. "Lewis used to say a flame doesn't just live on oil, it lives on faith." Roy looked at her for a long time, then down at his gloved hands. "Faith," he repeated. "That's been a hard thing to carry lately." "Then leave some of it here," she said. "That's what this table was made for." The air between them felt warm again, quiet in a way that made you want to stay. Roy nodded, his voice low. "Maybe we will." Martha stood, her knees cracking softly, and pulled a blanket higher over Eli's shoulders. She brushed his hair back with a mother's care, then turned off one of the candles to let the others shine brighter. For the first time in years, the diner felt like it was listening, like the walls themselves understood what mercy sounded like. Roy rubbed his thumb over a chipped edge of the counter. "You've still got that light, ma'am." he said. Martha looked up at the lantern, then at him. "No," she said quietly. "Now it's ours." Roy didn't reply. He just nodded, the fire's glow reflecting in his eyes. The first light came slow, sliding across the diner floor, like the world was still deciding if it wanted to wake. Martha was already up. She hadn't really slept, just sat by the counter with a cold cup of tea, listening to the quiet that had replaced the storm. It wasn't the hollow silence she'd known for years. It was different now, soft, alive, carrying traces of voices and laughter that still seemed to hang in the air. Behind her came the sound of boots against tile and a low groan. Roy stretched, rubbing his neck. His voice was thick with sleep. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in years. One by one, the others stirred awake, Tucker yawning loud enough to rattle the window, Mikey limping toward the stove to feed the dying flame, Ben brushing snow from his coat. They moved quietly, as if they knew they were still inside something sacred. Eli slept in the corner booth, face half hidden beneath a blanket. His breathing was slow, even. Martha found herself watching him longer than she meant to. Roy came up beside her at the counter. "Looks like the storm's done," he said. "Storms always end," she murmured, faint smile tugging her lips. "They just like to remind you who's stronger before they do." Roy chuckled softly. The sound filled the room like the first bit of sunlight. Then Eli stirred, a faint sound barely there, but everyone turned. Martha was already at his side. "Easy, baby," she said, her hand brushing his hair. "You scared us half to death last night." Eli blinked, weak, but smiling. "Feels like I slept through a war." "You did," Roy said, "and you won." The men laughed quietly, soft, exhausted laughter, the kind that only comes after fear breaks. Martha poured a cup of warm tea and held it out. "Here, sweetheart." Slow sips. He tried to sit, and Roy helped him. Martha tucked the blanket tighter around his legs. "You stay put. The world can wait." Eli nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." She touched his shoulder gently. "Don't thank me. Thank the ones who didn't give up." By mid-morning, the diner smelled like life again. Coffee, damp jackets, soap, and wood smoke. The men moved with quiet purpose, folding blankets, wiping tables, sweeping the floor, as though the act itself were a kind of prayer. Martha tried to stop them. "You don't have to." Roy smiled. "We know. We just want to leave it better than we found it." Eli sat by the window, watching sunlight bounce off the snow. He looked pale still, but his eyes were clear and alive. Mikey knelt, helping him tie his boots, both of them smiling in that quiet, brotherly way that didn't need words. When they were done, the diner looked different. Still worn, still old, but alive again. The kind of place that could start over if someone just believed it could. Roy stood by the door, pulling on his gloves. "We should get moving before it ices again." Martha nodded, her smile faltering. "I know." He hesitated, glancing around the room. "This place," he said, "slowly feels like it's supposed to be here. It's been waiting for someone to remember it," she said. Roy held her gaze for a long moment, then turned. The men followed him out, boots thudding softly against the floor, jackets brushing against the air. Outside, the engines roared to life, one by one, steady deep, the sound echoing down the quiet street like thunder fading into distance. Martha stood in the doorway, her scarf pulled close. She didn't wave. She just watched until the last red taillight vanished into the white. Then the silence returned, gentle, almost tender. The air smelled faintly of smoke and soap. When she turned back inside, she noticed it, an envelope sitting by the coffee pot. Brown creased her name scrawled across the front, for Mama Lewis, for keeping the fire alive. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a neat stack of folded bills, $900. For a moment she just stood there, the light from the lantern glinting off the paper. Then her gaze lifted to the photo on the wall, her and Lewis Young smiling beneath the diner's fresh sign. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "You see that, love? The light you started, it's still burning." She set the envelope beside the photo and laid her hand on the frame. For a second, just a heartbeat, it felt warm. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Slow, steady, like someone who'd finally remembered how. Hours later, the world outside had changed again. The snow was melting in thin silver threads down the street, sunlight glinting off puddles in the cracks. Martha stood by the stove, looking at the pot, half full of soup, the last of last night's miracle. The smell of honey and chicken still lingered, faint but sweet. She stirred it once, then looked out the window at the empty street. For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly she whispered to the air, "They came in strangers," left as proof that kindness doesn't freeze easy. Her eyes softened. The pot on the stove steamed lightly, waiting. She filled it again, water, a bit of leftover chicken, the last spoonful of honey. Her movements were slow but sure. This time she didn't feel like she was cooking for ghosts. When the soup was ready, she carried it outside and placed it on a small folding table by the door. The cold bit her fingers, but she didn't pull away. She taped a piece of cardboard to the window, written in her careful hand, "Free hot soup for anyone who needs warmth." At first, no one came. The street was still only the soft hiss of melting snow and the occasional gust of wind. Then a man appeared, a thin figure in a torn coat, shoulders hunched. He paused at the sign, uncertain. Martha waved him over. "Come on, honey," she called softly. "It's still hot." He hesitated, then stepped closer. She poured him a cup, steam curling between them. His hands shook as he took it, the cup warming his cracked fingers. He took a sip, eyes closing for a moment, like someone remembering what it meant to be human. "God bless you," he said. Martha smiled. He already did. As he walked away, the air seemed a little lighter. Soon another figure appeared, then a woman with a small boy clutching her sleeve, then two more. Martha served each of them in turn, her voice gentle, her hand steady. Between ladles, she told them about the night before the storm, the riders, the light that refused to die. They listened quietly. The woman wiped her eyes. The boy smiled when Martha handed him a piece of bread shaped like a heart. Across the street, a man stopped to watch. He lifted his phone and snapped a picture. An old woman in a wool scarf standing by a steaming pot, the faded diner sign behind her glowing faintly in the winter sun. That photo would go farther than her story ever could, but Martha didn't know that yet. She just kept serving the smell of honey and soup drifting through the crisp air. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the last of the soup was gone, she walked home. The air was cold but gentle, the kind of cold that made you feel awake, not alone. She hung her coat, lit a single candle, and sat by the window. Across the street, the faint glow from Lewis's table still burned steady and warm. She'd left the lantern on, just like she always promised she would. Martha rested her chin on her hand and smiled. She didn't feel tired anymore, only calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've given something back to the world. Beside her lay an old notebook, the cover cracked with aged Lewis's. She opened to a blank page and began to write, in careful, uneven script, December 25th. The storm has passed. The diner is warm. Strangers became friends. Faith came home again. She set the pen down, watching the ink dry under the flickering candlelight. Outside, the light from the diner shimmered against the snow, painting a golden square on the pavement below. Martha blew out her candle. The room fell quiet, gentle. But across the street, the light stayed. That morning, the sky was low and heavy gray as steel. The air held a strange stillness. No birds, no wind, only quiet. Martha adjusted her scarf and reached to stir the pot again. The soup rippled gently, and then she heard it, a sound from far down the main road, deep, slow, steady. Engines. Dozens of them. At first it was faint, like thunder rolling under the earth. Then it grew fuller, closer, heavier, until the ground itself began to hum beneath her feet. The cup on the table rattled. The glass of the diner door vibrated. Martha turned toward the sound, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of those engines. "What on earth?" she whispered. And then she saw it, a shimmer of chrome through the haze, glinting like the sun breaking through storm clouds. The hum grew louder until it wasn't sound anymore. It was weight. It pressed through the pavement, through her shoes, straight into her bones. Martha stepped off the curb, scarf pulled tight around her neck, eyes fixed on the bend of the street. And then they appeared. At first, just a shimmer of chrome through the mist, then headlights, dozens of them cutting through the gray. One line became two, then four, until the street itself seemed to move. Engines rolled like thunder, but steady, not wild, not chaos, purpose. Leather jackets, black helmets, silver logos. Hell's Angels. Martha froze. Her hands trembled against her coat. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. The sound filled the block, pouring through every open window. Curtains parted, doors cracked open. People stepped outside, drawn as if the noise itself had called their names. Children stood barefoot on porches, men in work coats shaded their eyes, and the woman from the green house across the street whispered, "It's them. It's the bikers from the storm." The convoy didn't stop at once. It folded slow and deliberate, like a tide drawing in. When the first row reached the diner, every engine idled low, then one by one began to quiet. 100, then 2, then 500. When the last one fell silent, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The street that had been trembling a minute ago was now still enough to hear the creak of a distant sign and the hiss of Martha's little stove. Then Roy Carter stepped forward. He moved like he had that night. Steady, calm shoulders broad against the cold. His jacket bore the same insignia, a red-winged skull stitched over the heart. When he took off his helmet, the crowd murmured. Martha didn't move from her spot by the table. The ladle hung loose in her hand, dripping soup onto the snow. Roy walked up to her through the narrow path that had formed between the bikes. Men bowed their heads as he passed. "Mama Lewis," he said quietly, voice rough with the cold, and something else. Martha blinked, half smiling in disbelief. "Roy Carter," she said, as if testing that he was real. "You come all this way for lunch?" That earned a soft chuckle from somewhere in the crowd. Roy shook his head. "Not for lunch, ma'am. For homecoming." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring of keys, worn smooth from time, and used the metal glinting against the dull gray light. Martha stared. "What's that supposed to mean?" Roy turned slightly and gestured behind him. A flatbed truck idled at the back of the line, its side marked in black letters, Hell's Angels. He held up a brown envelope, next its corners creased. 3 weeks ago, that photo of you went everywhere, he said. People started calling, sending donations. Bikers, veterans, strangers. Enough to buy back the building from the bank. Martha's mouth parted, but no words came. Roy stepped closer, voice low enough for only her and the first few rows to hear. "It's yours again, ma'am. Every brick, every chair, every inch. You kept the light burning for us when nobody else did, so we figured the least we could do was give it back." A hush rippled through the street. Even the air seemed to still. Martha looked down at the keys in his open palm, the way the light caught the edge of one brass tooth. Her throat tightened, and for a moment her knees almost gave out. She gripped the counter behind her just to stay upright. "Roy, I don't know what to say." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to say anything. Just open the door." Martha reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the cool metal. For a second, she saw Lewis's hand over hers the way he used to guide her when locking up late at night. Her breath shook. Then she closed her fingers around the keys. The crowd erupted not with cheers, but with applause, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat come back to life. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She turned toward the old diner, the boards across the windows, the padlock on the door she hadn't touched in years. "Lewis's table," she whispered. "You're coming home." For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the faint clink of metal as the keys swayed in Martha's trembling hand. Roy nodded toward the boarded door. "Go on, ma'am," he said softly. "Let's bring it back to life." Her boots crunched against the snow as she stepped forward. The crowd parted for her, hundreds of eyes following, breath steaming in the cold. Each step seemed to echo off the walls of the quiet buildings, the same street that had once watched her walk here alone every night just to light a candle. The lock was stiff and frozen. She slid the key in, turned once, and it stuck. Roy stepped forward, voice gentle. "Lift and turn, ma'am." Like before. The lock gave with a sharp snap that cut the silence clean in half. A gasp spread through the crowd. Martha pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, and the smell of dust and wood and time spilled into the street. Sunlight fell in through the doorway, catching the floating dust, turning it to gold. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then from somewhere behind the line of Hell's Angels, a familiar voice called out soft but steady. "Need a hand with that, ma'am." Martha turned. Eli was there, standing between two of the bikes, his arm in a sling, but his smile wide and sure. He looked stronger, older somehow, the boy who'd nearly died in her diner, now walking with a limp but holding his head high. She covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "Lord above." "Eli." He stepped forward slowly, snow crunching under his boots. "Couldn't let you do all the heavy lifting alone, could I?" Roy grinned behind her. "He made us wait for him. Said if we were coming back, he was walking through that door too." Eli moved up beside Martha and nodded toward the open diner. "Ready." She took a deep breath and smiled through tears. "Always." Together they stepped inside. The air was cold and still, but it felt alive, as if the room itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this exact moment. The counter was layered in dust. The chairs stacked the clock above the register, frozen at 11:07. Eli reached out and brushed a hand across the surface, leaving a clean streak. "Still smells the same." he said. Martha nodded, like work and home at the same time. Roy followed them in boots echoing on the floorboards. "All right, folks," he said, turning back toward the door. "Let's get to it." Outside, the street erupted with movement. Hell's Angels peeled off gloves and jackets, unloading paint cans, planks, toolboxes, and new bulbs. Neighbors rushed forward to help. Children dragged buckets of soapy water across the snow. One old man set up a ladder. A woman brought her own broom. Someone started scrubbing windows while a pair of teens hammered loose boards off the front wall. Eli found a rag and began wiping the counter beside Martha, his one good arm moving slow but steady. "Guess I owe this place my life," he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes warm. "You already paid, son. Just being here's enough." The day unfolded like a memory coming true. Hammers struck, paint rolled, laughter spilled into the air. The smell of wood and soap filled the diner. By late afternoon, the gray walls had turned soft yellow again, and the tables gleamed under clean light. Roy climbed onto a stool and held up the old lantern, its glass wiped clean. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it still works." He passed it to Martha. "You want to light it, ma'am?" Her hands trembled as she poured the oil and struck the match. The flame caught fast, bright, warm, alive. Applause broke out outside the diner. Eli stood behind her face, lit by the glow, and whispered, "Looks just like it did that night, except nobody's dying this time." Martha laughed through tears. "No, baby. This time it's living." Roy leaned on the counter, nodding toward the crowd. "Take a look, ma'am. The whole street's come home." She turned and saw people standing shoulder to shoulder watching through the open door. Hell's Angels, neighbors, children, strangers, all bathed in the soft light spilling from Lewis's table. The golden glow reached the snow outside, reflecting off the chrome bikes, turning the cold white street into something warm again. And for the first time in 5 years, Martha Lewis didn't feel like a keeper of memories anymore. She felt like part of a miracle. By the time dusk settled over Maple Street, the tools were quiet, the paint smell fading into something softer, warmth, wood, and life. Inside, Lewis's table lights glowed steady, the air carrying that faint sweetness of honey and broth. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, looking around with disbelief. The place wasn't just clean, it was awake. Every color seemed brighter, every corner breathing again. She ran her fingers along the counter, smooth, polished, warm to the touch, and whispered, "Welcome back, old friend." Then she turned to the stove where a single pot of soup was already bubbling, its steam curling like a heartbeat reborn. Eli sat at the booth by the window, his arm still in a sling, sleeves rolled up, face lit by the amber glow. Roy leaned beside him, exhaustion softening into contentment. "You sure you got enough left in you for one more night?" Roy asked. Eli grinned. "After what she did for me, I could stay here forever." Martha smiled over her shoulder. "Don't tempt me, boy. I might just make you wash the dishes forever, too." That earned laughter, the kind that sounded like home. Outside, the street had filled again, but this time with quiet anticipation. Someone shouted from the doorway, "Mama Lewis, you serving already?" She chuckled, the sound light and free. "Doors open. If you're cold, come sit where it's warm." People poured in. Hell's Angels, neighbors, strangers, children, all stepping carefully, hats off, voices low. They filled the booths and stools shoulder to shoulder, as if afraid that talking too loud might break the spell. Martha moved among them, with her ladle pouring steaming soup into every bowl she could find. "Eat," she said softly. "That's what this place was made for." Someone asked, half joking, "How much this miracle costs, ma'am?" She paused, smiled, and shook her head. Same price as always, a little hunger and a lot of heart. The laughter that followed filled the diner, rising to the ceiling until it sounded almost like music. Roy sat near the counter, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on Martha as she worked. "Hard to believe, ma'am," he said. "All this started with one candle and a pot of soup." She nodded, not looking up. "Miracles don't start big, Roy. They just start honest." Eli took his bowl and stood beside the counter. His voice was quiet but sure. "She kept me alive when I didn't think I could make it. Guess now it's her turn to see what she's done." Martha turned, startled, her eyes softening. "I see it, baby. I see it every time you smile." The noise in the diner rose again, clinking bowls, laughter, the scrape of chairs. But beneath it all, the flame from the lantern flickered on the counter, its light reflected in every face, golden and steady. When Martha finally sat down, it was in Lewis's old seat by the window. She watched the crowd, all of them eating together, sharing bread, sharing warmth, and her heart swelled until she thought it might burst. Roy followed her gaze. You gonna keep that lantern burning again tonight? She smiled. It's been burning this whole time. I just didn't know other people could see it. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle and slow. Through the glass, people on the street stopped to look in at the light, the laughter, the faces leaning close over bowls of soup. Martha closed her eyes, whispering to the still air, "You see that, Louis? We did it." The oil lantern flickered once, then steadied bright and strong. And above the door, the new sign gleamed under the snow light, Louis's table, the light that never went out. By sunrise, Louis's table was already awake. The front door stood open, letting in the early spring rain and the sound of a broom sweeping the sidewalk. Inside, Martha moved slowly but surely between tables, her shawl slipping off one shoulder as she set out mugs and wiped the counter clean. Every morning started the same way, a pot of soup simmering on the stove, coffee brewing, and that warm voice calling out, "Come on in, it's too cold to stay out there." The first to arrive were the ones who had the least. A man who slept behind the bus station, a woman carrying a baby wrapped in an old blanket, two veterans with tired eyes. Martha never asked names. She just poured, smiled, and said, "Eat while it's hot." No one left hungry. By noon, the place was packed again. Workers from the garage across the street, a mailman on his lunch break, a retired teacher who came just to listen to people talk. They filled the diner with noise spoons, clinking boots, stomping laughter bouncing off the walls. Eli ran the kitchen now, moving fast behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, calling orders over the sizzle of oil. 2 more bowls, extra bread. Roy quit stealing biscuits. Roy, seated at his usual corner, raised a hand. "I ain't stealing. I'm tasting for quality control." Martha shook her head, chuckling. "Boy, you've been nesting quality since February." Evening brought a different crowd. Lights dimmed soft, tables pushed together. Someone always brought a guitar. And before long, the diner sounded like a porch on a summer night. Voices singing, people clapping along, strangers laughing like family. On the wall near the door was something everyone stopped to look at, a wide patch of color called the Wall of Hands. It had started small, one handprint from Eli painted red the day he returned to work, then another from Roy, then dozens more, blue, green, yellow, white, each palm pressed against the wall, overlapping the others, some big, some tiny, every color different, every story the same. Above it, a sign read, "Everyone who's been fed or has fed another." By closing time, the smell of soup still lingered, and the lights glowed gold against the windows. Martha stood in the doorway, waving at the last guests leaving for the night. "See you tomorrow," she said. "You'll see all of us." "Mama Louis," someone called back. Eli stacked the last chair and leaned on the counter. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Martha looked around the room, the clean tables, the empty mugs, the wall of hands glowing under the lantern. "It feels right," she said simply, "like it was never gone." Outside, the street was quiet, but light from the diner spilled across the sidewalk, warm and steady, like the heartbeat of a neighborhood that had finally come back to life. By early spring, people had stopped calling Louis's table a diner. They called it the heart of Maple Street. The city paper had run a story about it, the Memphis miracle, how one woman fed a city with a candle and a promise. Reporters showed up every few days, cameras flashing, but Martha never said much. She'd wipe her hands on her apron, offer them soup, and say, "If you want to understand, sit down and eat. The rest will explain itself." The Hells Angels still came by every week, though not as guests anymore. They brought fresh supplies, fixed the roof after a storm, and made sure no one on that block ever went hungry again. Roy always claimed the same stool by the counter, pretending he came to check the wiring. Martha never called him out on the lie. One morning, Eli walked in early and found her pinning something new to her sweater. It was a small silver badge engraved with 3 words, "Keep the fire alive." He smiled. "Who gave you that?" She looked up. "A girl from the school. Said her mama told her I was the reason their house still had heat this winter. I told her I just handed her a bowl of soup. She said that's where it started." Eli chuckled softly. "You realize you've become famous, right? They're calling you Mama Louis, the light keeper." Martha rolled her eyes. "I'm just an old lady with a pot and a key." He grinned. That key changed a city. By summer, the Hells Angels Light Fund had been formed, a foundation set up by the Hells Angels and the City Council, helping senior citizens and homeless veterans across Memphis. Every form they printed bore the same motto in Martha's handwriting: "Warm hands make stronger hearts." Each December 24th, the block filled again. Hundreds gathered for the Night of Warm Hands, a dinner for anyone who needed a place to belong. The street glowed gold under hanging lights. The smell of soup and bread filled the air. Hell's angels stood beside bankers' children, beside old men. And at the center of it all, on the counter of Lewis's table, the old oil lantern burned bright. Inside a glass case, flame steady, never dying. Martha still worked the kitchen every day, slower now, her steps careful but sure. She wore the same faded gray scarf and her badge pinned neatly to her chest. People called her Mama Lewis wherever she went, at church, at the market, at the diner, and she'd just smile, never correcting them. When volunteers tried to take over her morning duties, she'd wave them off. "I'm not done yet," she'd say. A light's only good if it's tended. Sometimes she'd pause by the wall of hands, running her fingers over the colorful palms pressed there by hundreds of strangers. "You see that Lewis," she'd whisper. "They're still adding to it." The people nearby would see her talking to no one, and they'd just smile because everyone on Maple Street knew exactly who she was talking to. It was late now, long past closing time. The street outside was empty, the kind of quiet Memphis only knew after the rain. Drops still slid from the gutters, tapping softly against the windows like a clock that had forgotten to keep count. Inside Lewis's table, the chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and the air smelled faintly of soap and broth. Only one table was still set, the one by the window, the same booth where Lewis used to sit. Martha lowered herself into the seat, her knees stiff from the long day. The scarf around her neck was the same one she'd worn that first night, gray, frayed soft with time. Beside her, the old oil lantern flickered in its glass case, its glow steady gold alive. She poured herself a cup of tea and watched the steam drift upward, twisting in front of the photo on the wall, a young couple standing proudly beneath a freshly painted sign, "Where neighbors eat like family." She smiled at it, the kind of smile that comes when the heart's too full to speak. Her reflection met hers in the glass, older now, lined and calm, and for a moment she could almost see him there beside her. Lewis with his sleeves rolled up and that soft grin that meant "You did good, Martha." The rain picked up outside, gentle but steady, drumming softly on the roof. She tilted her head slightly, listening. "I hear you," she murmured. "You were right, you know. They did come home." The lantern's flame danced higher, as if in answer. From the kitchen came the sound of a dish settling, probably the metal expanding in the cool air, but it made her laugh quietly. "Don't fuss, Lewis. Everything's under control." Her eyes fell to the counter where the wall of hands glowed under the last bit of light. Hundreds of colors, hundreds of stories, all reaching upward. "You see that?" she whispered. "They kept the fire alive." She sat there for a long time, her hand resting on the tabletop, her tea growing cold. When the clock struck 9, she stood, adjusted her scarf, and blew gently on the lantern's glass. The flame steadied again, refusing to die. "Good night, love," she said softly. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, tapping gently against the windows of Lewis's table. The street was empty now, except for the slow reflection of the lantern's glow spreading across the wet pavement. In each puddle, the light shimmered like a quiet heartbeat, steady and sure. A few Hell's Angels passed by, their engines' low headlights sweeping briefly across the front door before fading into the distance. They didn't need to stop. They knew the flame was still there. Inside, the lantern kept burning calm, golden, unhurried. Its light reached the tables, the counter, the photo on the wall, and the chair where Martha had been sitting only moments before. Everything in the room seemed to hold its breath, warmed by the quiet she left behind. Through the window, the glow spilled into the night, painting a path along the rain-soaked street. It wasn't bright or loud, just steady, like a promise being kept. And somewhere between the drizzle and the soft hum of the city, it felt as though the world itself had paused, not to listen for words, but simply to feel the light. If this story touched your heart, leave a little light in the comments, maybe a word, a thought, or someone you're thankful for. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because somewhere out there, another light is waiting to be found.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.